So we've been hyping up the race for the fourth 1 seed, believing that UConn's spot there was a little shaky, especially going into a rematch against St. John's last night. The Huskies instead shut everybody up by handing the Johnnies Patino's worst loss there, an emphatic 72-40 blowout victory, snapping St. John's 13-game win streak. So, per our CBS Sports bracketology, those 1 seeds, they remain the same. Duke projected the #1 overall. Then you've got Michigan, Arizona, and UConn. Still, there is basketball left on the calendar, and a few more teams remain in the mix for a 1 seed line. Let's welcome in college basketball analyst Roy Hibbert and, of course, the Georgetown legend. Hi, Roy. Let's talk about UConn. What did that win for the Huskies, really statement win, do for the race for that fourth 1 seed?
I mean, it just emphasized how much pressure they can really put on you at every position. And that game really started off with Terrace Reed Jr., who had an amazing game, 20 points, 11 rebounds. More impressive, is his 6 blocks. And that team really, allowed him to get going early. St. John's was overplaying. He was able to get easy baskets to the lane just by jumping the lane or trying to steal a pass from him. He didn't have to work too hard. And on top of that, their defense really held out. I think it was like a mix of a good, zen moment where their offense was leading and their defense was backing them up. They held St. John's to 20% field goal shooting. If they do that to any other team in the tournament, they're going to have a nice run, at least to the Sweet 16, to the Elite 8. But this is one of the most dominant, games I've seen them have. They only allowed St. John's 2 field goals in that second half, so they racked up a bunch of buckets at the free throw line, St. John's did, but they put everybody on notice.
Certainly, and of course you got to ask the question, is it bad offense or is it good defense? Probably a little bit of both, but St. John's, they ended that game missing 24 straight field goals. We still expect the Johnnies to be a tournament team, but Roy, have you ever had a game like that where there's just a lid on the bucket?
There has been games like that. But at the same time, you try to fight yourself out of that hole if the offense isn't going. To me, the fact that they had counted zero steals that game, says a lot to me. They weren't locked in. And I will say this: UConn, past couple games against Georgetown, even Creighton, they came out flat and everything like that. When they had St. John's, who has a number next to their name, they came out and was aggressive. But to me, St. John's looked a little bit discombobulated on offense. They had nothing going for them. A lot of times, I look for body language as a former player, and a lot of guys were just looking around at the refs. If they ran into the refs or ran into the lane, got knocked to the ground, they're looking for somebody to bail them out. If somebody takes a bad shot, Zuby Ejiofor is just looking around like, somebody's going to help us out? No, you have to figure it out on your own. They didn't, connect the dots, and it led to a really bad loss. I'm sure Coach Pitino is not happy about that. Probably taking off the jerseys, making them run sprints galore today.
Yeah, I can't imagine it's a good day to be a member of the St. John's team. But ultimately, like I said, we expect both of those teams to be in the tournament. You add in Villanova, and that's just 3 projected teams out of the Big East that we have in our bracketology right now. What do you think overall of the league that sent 5 teams last year?
It's even more top-heavy now. Obviously, you talked about UConn, St. John's. Villanova's a very strong team. Very little talked about. They're winners of the last 7 out of 8, led by a dynamic duo of Tyler Perkins, who's 6'4", can get to the lane. He does a lot of dirty work, getting offensive rebounds. And then Arcadian Lewis, he's another star player who plays with a lot of toughness. But to me, it's about it's about momentum as you shift towards the end of the season. They have a very winnable game against St. John's on Saturday. So if they can keep this going, they could sneak in there, and you never know what can happen. A couple years ago, Georgetown was probably last in the Big East under Patrick Ewing, and they went on a run in the Big East tournament. So Villanova could do the same thing.
Yeah, Seton Hall, of course, their next game against UConn, a desperate Seton Hall that we have currently as a first 4 out. So still another opportunity for a Big East team to get in. Let's shift over to the Big Ten. They have 8 teams projected in the field. 5 of them are in the top 16 seeds. Who's going to maybe make some noise from the Big Ten? Call your shot, Roy.
So I'm going to say this. My colleague John Rothstein loves Nebraska, loves it, and I say he wants to wring my neck every time I say I don't think they have it in them. They just are missing a piece. They haven't been tested yet over the coming years. But I think Illinois is great. Pete Wagler, he's an amazing freshman, 6'6", averaging 18 points. You know, he's going to get drafted pretty high. Boswell, he's crafty. And I like teams with size. The Ivisic boys, they're big. They can rebound. They can score from the outside. I think they're great. Purdue, I know that they're talked about for a long time, but, you know, I think they have a lot of seniors who don't get talked about a lot. Trey Kaufman-Renn, he has been there and done that with Zach Edey by himself now, and he's really pushing Purdue as well. I know we'll talk about the rest of the guys later on when we talk Michigan State and Purdue, but I feel like Michigan, oh boy, I think this team really has it in them. I know they lost to Duke, but what I saw them do against Purdue a couple of days ago, where they just shot over all the players. Adai Mara, he's been playing really well, he's able to score. He's making some really good assists in the lane. Yaxel Lindenborg, he's out playing physical. So, and Morez Johnson, that Michigan team has size. Elliot Cadeau is playing well. What a difference a year can make with him transferring out of UNC and going to Michigan, where he's playing like a totally different player. So I think those three teams right there have the most, let's say, like ceiling in the tournament.
Yeah, certainly hard to pick. Like I said, 8 teams currently projected in the field. 3 Big Ten teams, though, on the bubble. That's Ohio State, Indiana, and USC. Who do you like from that group to find their way in the big dance?
I like Ohio State. I think they have a little bit of a roughness to them, and they can get to the lane and they can score. But now, like I said, all teams are going into this Big Ten championship, so they have a chance to maybe make it. They're on the outside, but I like Ohio State.
All right, there you have it. Let's do it. Let's talk about that top 15 showdown in the Big Ten tonight. Michigan State versus Purdue, maybe 2 of the nation's top point guards going against each other. You got Braden Smith and Jeremy Fears. What excites you about those two going head-to-head tonight?
Well, Jeremy Fears, what I like about him is the duality of him, you know, versus, you see, when he played UCLA, he had 16 points, 10 assists. He was 4 for 8 from the three-point line. So he's not the best three-point shooter, but he helped that team win. This was one of his better shooting nights. And plus, he always plays really good defense. He had 2 or 3 steals. But then the next game against Ohio State, he only had 11 points. Not the best stellar, but he had 8 assists. So that's a common denominator for him, is just those assists, playing for each other, and just making sure everybody touches the ball, not just him. So he can have a great night, or he can have like a mediocre night, but he's still distributing the ball, trying to help his team win. Now, to me, Braden Smith is the head of the snake. To me, he has to be aggressive early, hit some couple shots, but then he can open up the lane, because he could bring 2 to the ball, and then he could hit Oscar Clough, the big guy who's been a real, I think, glue guy for that team for pocket passes. He had some real sexy passes between the legs to him throughout the year, and that gives guys like other guys to be able to score. So I think he is the go-to player right there, and he'll open up so much things for guys to be able to score.
You mentioned those assists. Fears #1 in the nation in assists. Braden Smith #2. So we should see some good passes tonight. Roy Hibbert, we appreciate you breaking down the Big East and the Big Ten for us. And 2 guys who are doing this nearly every day this time of year, Gary Parrish and Matt Norlander on the Eye on College Basketball podcast. Scan that QR code to watch now or listen wherever you find your podcasts.
Here's a look at our latest bracketology. Last 4 in: Texas A&M, Cal, TCU, and Santa Clara. First 4 out: New Mexico, VCU, Seton Hall, and Ohio State. Let's welcome in Gary Parrish and Roy Hibbert to break down those final spots in the field of 68 late in February. The guys, we've been spending, as I referenced in the tease, a lot of time talking 1 seed, single-digit seeds, but we're talking about these teams that had to win and potentially get a little bit of help to hang on to their spots right now. GP, I'm going to give you first word on Texas A&M, hanging on to one of those last 4 spots after the loss to Arkansas. What's your thought process on the Aggies right now as we sit and having this conversation?
Well, they've gone from one of the best stories in college basketball to very much on the bubble, and it's happened pretty quickly. It wasn't too long ago, Tommy. They were alone in first atop the SEC standings. Now, some of that was schedule-induced. They had not played some of the tougher teams. Now they have, and they're trending in the wrong direction. As you know, just lost at Arkansas last night. They've now lost 5 of their past 7. They're 42nd in the net, 36th at KenPom. So they've got some strong computer numbers, but just 8 and 9 in the first 2 quadrants. So under 500 in quadrant 1, under 500 in the first 2 quadrants, 4 and 3 in quadrant 2. The good news for them is that the schedule is manageable. The way you set it up, I think is right for most bubble teams, but with A&M, they don't have to do anything crazy to stay on the right side of the bubble. The next 3 games to close out the regular season, Texas at home, Kentucky at home, LSU on the road. They should be favored in all 3 of those, and certainly are projected that way in certain computers. So if I'm Bucky McMillan, I'm looking at my basketball team right now and saying, hey guys, we aren't where we were just a few weeks ago, but we are still better than we were supposed to be. People didn't have us in the NCAA tournament, and all we got to go do is close strong, win winnable games, and we're going to be in that field of 68. I like A&M's position, even if they have dropped 5 of 7.
I think, GP, you're right on, but for me, I feel like this team is a little streaky, man. They win 4, then they lose 4, then they win 2, then they may lose the next 3. To me, it's just that there's no consistency there. And I want to start here. I know we're talking about these teams, but you think about last year where UNC was in this situation. They lost that first game, coming into the tournament after they played in these first 4 games. But look here, this team has a lot to do. They need to win at least 2 out of those 3. Texas, Kentucky, and LSU, those are going to be tough ones to do. They need to get 2 out of 3. But to me, the biggest thing it's going to hamper them. The last couple games, they've been having double-figure turnovers. They're just very loose with the ball. You can't be giving up 15 turnovers and expect to, say, I need to win these games if you don't plug this hole right here.
So let's get to TCU next, which is also in the last 4 in. And Roy, I'm going to give you first word on these Horned Frogs. They've won 5 of the last 6. Their final 3 games of the regular season, 2 on the road at Kansas State and Texas Tech, then finally a home game with Cincy. What stands out to you about the Horned Frogs right now?
Well, I mean, when I look at teams in these situations saying like, hey, have they, beaten the top 25 team? How close was the loss? Like, were they in it or were they blown out? They beat Iowa State. They actually turned some good defense into some good offense. 19 points off of those 17 turnovers from Ohio State. So that is something that can be like looked at as a thing that, hey, if they get in there, they could potentially, catch somebody on a bad day. But obviously, again, they need to win the next 2 out of 3. Kansas State is very, very, very winnable. They're teeter-tottering right now. Obviously, they have a game against Texas Tech without a JT Toppin, so that could be a situation there. So it's very winnable. But then they have Cincinnati, and you never know what type of Cincinnati team is going to show up. One that's ready to play from the start, they're going to jump on you, or a team that's going to lay on their belly and let you do what you want to do. But Robinson and Edmonds, they have to play well. They have a really good bench that has double-figure scoring. Toulson, he's a very big part of that. So this is a team that you need to watch for, but they need to get at least 2 out of 3.
So we just got finished talking about Texas A&M. TCU is kind of the opposite of Texas A&M. On one hand, they're in similar spots relative to the bracket, but they got here in entirely different ways. I told you Texas A&M has lost 5 of 7. Like you noted, TCU has won 5 of 6, got their 4th quadrant 1 victory in the process. That was the win Roy referenced over Iowa State. So they're now 4 and 7 in quadrant 1, but 4 and 1 in quadrant 2. So 8 and 8 in the first 2 quadrants. That's good for a bubble team. Here's the problem. They got a quadrant 3 loss to Notre Dame and a quadrant 4 loss to New Orleans. New Orleans was the season opener. Notre Dame was on December 5th. So if TCU could just somehow start the season on December 6th, they're in this field pretty easily. But it's everything that happened before then that gives them problem. Roy referenced the schedule going forward. I think it sets up nicely. You get to play a Kansas State team that fired its coach, a Texas Tech team that's missing its best player, and a Cincinnati team that, like Roy said, is all over the place game to game. Kansas State, you need to go win that one if you're a legitimate NCAA tournament team. Cincinnati, you need to win that one at home if you're a legitimate NCAA tournament team. And if you can just do those 2 things, you don't have to go to Texas A&M and win. You got a better shot to do it than you otherwise would because of the absence of Toppin. But either way, the computers are still going to judge that as a quadrant 1 loss. If you can pick up Kansas State, Cincinnati, I don't care what you do at Texas Tech, TCU would then enter the Big 12 tournament on the right side of the bubble.
I love how you framed that, GP. It's also March campaigning season when we get to Selection Sunday. Like, if you just don't look at this part, but you look at the rest of this part, it'd certainly be good. And oddly enough, our bracketology team has TCU and Texas A&M as a first 4 game in the East region as of today. Let's get to Santa Clara. Last 4 in, actually last team in as of this conversation. They've got a game on CBS Sports Network against Oregon State Saturday. West Coast Conference, GP, we certainly know about St. Mary's, Gonzaga traditionally here, but take me through the path for the Broncos for the one more regular season game here and then the WCC tournament.
Yeah, this is the last weekend of the West Coast Conference we will ever see as it is currently constructed, because the Zags will play their final game in that league, a regular season game in that league, this weekend at St. Mary's. Santa Clara, incredible season so far, but they're obviously not safe. Projected as an 11 seed right now, 23-7 overall. Record's nice, just 1-5 in quadrant one. That's a problem. They are 7-1 in quadrant two, so 8-6 in the first two quadrants. That's good. Needless to say, got to knock out Oregon State this weekend on CBS Sports Network. And then I think, honestly, probably need to go to the championship game of the West Coast Conference tournament, or at least when you lose, make sure it is a loss to Gonzaga or St. Mary's, because what's going to happen, if you take any loss other than that, you're in trouble. But if you take a Gonzaga loss and a St. Mary's loss, that'll be a quadrant one loss. It's not going to kill you. But what will then happen is, if somebody other than, say, St. Louis wins the Atlantic 10, or somebody other than Miami University wins the MAC. In other words, the way this stuff usually works is, even if you're on the right side of the bubble a week out of Selection Sunday, that bubble is going to shrink as some of these one-bid leagues become multi-bid leagues. So if I'm Santa Clara, I don't want to spend the days leading up to Selection Sunday with anything on my resume going forward other than a West Coast Conference tournament championship or a loss, my last loss before Selection Sunday. It's got to be a competitive loss to Gonzaga or St. Mary's. If not, you're going to be sweating it out.
Yeah, I agree with GP. I'm worried about Santa Clara for everything you said about the stats and the net and everything. But to me, as a former player in the eye test, this team lives and dies by a three-point line. They will take up to 25 to 33s per game sometimes, and they may shoot 33% or they may shoot 44, 45%. So as a team like that, you never know. They're going to get this one, I believe, against Oregon State. And I agree with GP. They need to run the cards in the West Coast Conference tournament to have a really solid chance.
Yeah, this is a good exercise because the last team we'll talk about, which is Ohio State, will have games ahead of them to potentially leapfrog a team like Santa Clara. Right now, the Buckeyes are first for out, GP, but they're not playing well as of late, but they've got Purdue on the horizon, Indiana also as well, and of course the conference tournament here. So the Buckeyes, like maybe a week ago, were looking pretty good, but those losses have certainly hurt them.
Tommy, you make a good point. As I was explaining how that bubble could shrink, obviously one way is for the Atlantic 10 to become multi-bid, for the MAC to become multi-bid. But the other way is when teams on the other side of the bubble, the wrong side of the bubble, in the Big 10, in the Big 12, in the SEC, especially those three leagues, they get hot in a conference tournament. Because if you start advancing in one of those conference tournaments, it is almost certainly just going to be quad one opportunity after quad one opportunity. You string enough of those together, that's how you jump somebody like Santa Clara. Ohio State theoretically would be a candidate to do that. Strong computer numbers, top 40 in the net, top 40 at KenPom, top 40 at Torvik, wins above bubble, 44. The problem is 1 in 10 in quadrant one. And the one quadrant one win they got, it wasn't that immediately. It just flipped to that recently because Northwestern moved into the top 75 of the net. Right now, Northwestern sits at 69. So if they slip to 76, that's just 7 spots or lower. Then that quadrant one win, the only one the Buckeyes have, it flips to quadrant two. And then you're asking the committee to put a power conference team in the NCAA tournament as an at-large when they had a bunch of opportunities to get signature wins and just missed on every one of them. So they need to close the regular season strong. They've got opportunities. Purdue at home is a quad one. Penn State on the road is a quad two. Indiana at home is quad two right now, but it could be quad one if Indiana gets into the top 30 of the net. Right now, the Hoosiers are at 38. However it goes, you got to at least win 2 of those 3. And I would think maybe the one you want to win, or at least one of them, is the Purdue game. And the one you definitely don't want to lose is the Penn State game. Do that, and Jake Diebler, some of the pressure that's connected to him, it starts to go away. But this is a big, last week and a half of the regular season for Ohio State.
Yeah, Ohio State has a large road to climb, a mountain to climb. Obviously, a win against Purdue, like you said, GP would be great, but I think that's a tall task when a team I think like Purdue is starting to tighten up their grip a little bit, not to lose some of those games they lost earlier on in the season. But at the same time, Ohio State has a lot of work to do. You know, they put it on Bruce Thornton's back and Devin Royal. I think that they're going to have a hard time, let's just say, earning those last 2 wins versus Penn State and Indiana. Like I said, it's a long road to get there, but they have their offense. They rely too much on them. You know, Bruce has been great the whole season, his whole career there, but it's asking a lot of 2 guys to carry the whole load, and then obviously win these last 2 out of 3 at least, and then go on. I feel like they need to win at least, you know, get deep into the Big Ten tournament before they can really solidify themselves and get into the tournament.
We'll get Buckeyes and Boilermakers on CBS this weekend. Roy, GP, certainly appreciate you guys hopping on to talk about the final spots for some of these bubble teams. And speaking of Purdue, top 15 matchup against Sparty tonight in West Lafayette. Purdue is a 7.5-point favorite over Michigan State. That tip-off is at 8 Eastern, then 2 games on CBS Sports Network, 7 and 9 Eastern, respectively.